Three, two.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. James Bridgers, who is the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Nina Ashford, who is the Chief of Public Health Services, as well as Dr. Earl Statter, who is Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. Our guest this afternoon is Maryland State Delegate Julie Palakovich-Carr, who is the Montgomery County's Health Delegation Chair. Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year, and let's get started with the first media briefing of 2026, Mr. County Executive.
Hello, and thank you all for joining again. Certainly shaping up to be an interesting year. I think if we invade a country a week and we can keep it in the news for a week, we should be able to avoid discussing the Epstein papers for at least the next year. We'll see how all this works. I'm preparing for what's going to be a very busy week next week with the opening of the Maryland General Assembly on Wednesday and the release of my capital budget on Thursday, January 15th. And to preview, I'd like to focus on some of our goals heading into the session. Montgomery County is well represented with many of our own elected leaders holding key positions of power. Senator Ben Cramer and Delegate Julie Palakovich-Carr once again lead a delegation that includes the returning House Speaker, David Moon, and the new chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Delegate Janelle Wilkins. On the Environment and Transportation Committee, Mark Corman will remain as chair, and Ann Kaiser will become the vice chair. The Joint Committee on Legislative Ethics will now be led by Bonnie Collison, and on the Economic Matters Committee, Lord Charkoudian has been appointed as the new vice chair. There are several new leadership roles for delegates representing Montgomery County, including more than a dozen subcommittee positions and party leadership roles. On the Senate side, Nancy King serves as a majority leader, Brian Feldman is chair, and Cheryl Kagan is vice chair of the Education, Energy, Environment Committee. Will Smith and Jeff Waldstreicher are chair and vice chairs of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. I'm optimistic this group can help us modernize our economy and the way we collect revenue because, as we've seen over the last year, Montgomery County is not recession-proof. And I think we've also seen that Virginia continues to make major investments in transportation that we can only dream about. It's hard to be competitive when you're not willing to make the investments, and we need an all-out effort at the state level to put the county in a position to make the investments we need so that we can be competitive in this very competitive environment. We need investments in transportation to help fuel the growth, and that includes funding for the new Bethesda North Metro entrance, renovations to Lake Forest Transit Center, and continued support for our transition to a zero-emission bus fleet. We also need the state's continued support to help with school construction, business development, and small businesses impacted by Purple Line construction. And this year, we're scheduled to lose a substantial portion of state funding from one of the programs that is expiring this year. And ironically, or maybe not so ironically, it's going to put a bigger pinch on the county because this year's school budget reflects a need to catch up with past maintenance. And getting maintenance money is not an easy thing to do from the state. So we've got our work cut out for us, and we still continue to have serious needs that are going to have to be addressed. Our residents who are at risk of being priced out of their homes and need protection, and our historic efforts to build affordable housing will also continue to benefit from state support. Though we're hopeful about meaningful change for our community, we also know that the president stands opposed to diversity, equality, and helping the less fortunate. He has absolutely no respect for human life and has very little regard for people in the community, particularly if the people aren't white. He's focused on making sure that his rich friends get richer and that he can dismantle the kind of social safety nets that have given people hope and opportunity for decades. I mean, the social safety nets, particularly when it comes to Black Americans in this country, were put in place to undo literally centuries of discrimination and segregation. And the idea that we now think we can just walk away from this problem, it's been bad enough that we've never done what we needed to do, but that now we're going to walk away from it in its entirety is really antithetical to any of the values that we purport that we hold. And hopefully Congress or enough sane people in Congress anyway, will be able to push back on some of these things. There used to be a time when Republicans, for example, unanimously supported the Voting Rights Acts, where Republicans, voted for funding for for programs that supported childcare and education. It didn't used to be a partisan issue. People might debate how much, but they didn't debate whether if we should do these things. And we need a government in Washington that can actually form a consensus and be willing to do the things that America needs to do and not simply cater to the richest people in this country. Trump is the worst leader we've seen in the White House in nearly a century. Richard Nixon was more progressive in some of his actions than Donald Trump, and that's a pretty frightening thought. I never thought Richard Nixon would be the poster child for supporting environmental action and having a more open foreign policy. It's why our work on the local and state level is so important. Our focus must remain on how best to help people within our limited means, and the county's means are limited. We have to be honest about that. We're not going to be able to do everything. I'd like to welcome today's guest, Delegate Julie Plakovich-Carr. In addition to her leadership role in the delegation, she'll also serve as the Deputy Majority Whip and my favorite committee, one of them anyway, the chair of the Early Childhood Subcommittee on the Ways and Means Committee. I'm glad she could join us today. So thank you, Julie, and I'd like to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive, for including me on the call today. And actually, I'll say I'm among the folks who have new leadership roles this session. So actually, both positions that you just mentioned, I'm transitioning out of and am the new chair of the Revenues Subcommittee. But I think all those changes are still kind of trickling out into the public at this point. Let me just start with, in precisely 1 week, the Maryland General Assembly is going to be commencing the 2026 legislative session. And this is going to be a year of changes on many fronts. And as you highlighted, Mr. County Executive, there are a lot of new opportunities for members of the Montgomery County House delegation due to the recent transition in House leadership. Under Speaker Jocelyn Peña-Melnick, our collective leadership roles in the House have grown. Members of the Montgomery County delegation now chair 2 of the 7 standing committees. 3 Montgomery County delegates are now committee vice chairs, and 15 of our members are now in subcommittee leadership roles, as well as Delegate David Mood continuing on as House Majority Leader. Plus, there are a number of other Montgomery County delegates who were promoted to or continue on in other leadership roles in the House. This significant increase in leadership positions is a better reflection of our county's position as the largest delegation in the House of Delegates and of the talent of our members. Looking ahead to the new session, Maryland unfortunately continues to face many challenges as a result of federal actions. Maryland lost nearly 25,000 federal jobs last year, making us the hardest hit state in the nation, as reported today by the governor's office. More than 10,000 federal jobs in Maryland were lost in just October and November. Each of these lost jobs is a foregone opportunity for a Maryland family and for our state and local economies. In the upcoming session and in the years ahead, we must find new pathways to prosperity for our residents and for our state. Perhaps the single biggest challenge this session will be addressing the $1.5 billion state budget deficit, which is caused in no small part because of the sizable loss of federal and contractor jobs, as well as from trickle-down impacts of the tax breaks for corporations and billionaires enacted by Congress in H.R. 1. Meanwhile, many county residents are facing skyrocketing health insurance costs due to the lapse of federal health insurance tax credits. In my district alone, nearly 25,000 residents depended on these tax credits to make the purchase of health insurance affordable. Moreover, Maryland households have faced an average of $1,200 in increased costs for food and everyday essentials due to the president's tariffs. Residents are looking for relief, and we must be mindful of these daily struggles in the actions we take this session to balance the state budget. It's going to be a tough session, but I know that my delegation stands ready for the challenge, and we look forward to the continued work with our county partners to advance local priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate, for joining us today. Members of the media, if you have any questions for the delegate at this time, please raise your hands. I see Ginny Bixby with the banner. Good afternoon, Ginny. You might need to unmute, Ginny. Ginny, your hand's up, but we do not hear you. Do you have any questions?
And if she's having some issues, Jenny, you are welcome
Apparently,
to reach out to me after the press conference and we can talk on the phone.
absolutely. Members of the media, any additional questions for Delegate Julie Alakovich? Oh, I see Brian Sears, Maryland Manners.
Good morning, Delegate. I wanted to ask you a quick question since you referenced the budget challenges the state faces. You've been a leading proponent of the Fair Share Act. Do you anticipate reintroducing that bill this year?
At this time, I don't. We're getting some audio feedback. Maybe if you don't mind muting while I respond. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. I don't at this point anticipate reintroducing that bill this session. I am focused on a new piece of legislation that would decouple the state from about a dozen of the tax breaks that I referenced in my comments that were enacted under HR 1 by Congress this summer that are going to collectively impact the state's budget by several $100 million and will also have impacts to local government. So that is the revenues legislation that I'm focusing on for this session.
Thank you, Brian. Members of the media, any additional questions for the delegate this afternoon? No more questions? Well, Delegate, thank you for joining us. You can remain on the call if you'd like to, but if you need to depart, please feel free to do so. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you again. All right. So next thing, I want to thank the members of the media who joined me and Council President Natty Fani Gonzalez and others yesterday at the National Capitol Trolley Museum to discuss the latest climate action progress report and highlight our partnership with the University of Maryland and its Mesonet network. And more about that in a minute. We launched our climate action plan back in 2021 with a bold commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2027 and reach 100% by 2035. We all deserve cleaner air, healthier communities, and a sustainable future for our children. And since then, we've taken big steps forward. Through today, we're transforming our entire bus fleet to zero-emission buses. Today, 52 electric buses are already on the road. And by 2035, every bus will be clean and quiet. We made ride-on bus fares free for everyone because public transportation should be accessible to all, and we don't want costs to be a barrier. We passed building energy performance standards to make our buildings more efficient and reduce emissions. And when considering the impact of buildings and transportation, those two things account for about 90% of the greenhouse gas emissions created in Montgomery County. We also invested in clean energy, planting thousands of trees and building microgrids to ensure critical services. We're also committed to justice. For too long, policies that have favored the wealthier communities, not just in Montgomery County, but nationally, and have largely forced minority communities with the least resources to deal with the consequences of pollution or environmental negligence and deal with them on their own. That's a past that we're not going to repeat here. And we're ensuring the benefits reach every community by improving energy efficiency in low-income housing, expanding outreach, and creating programs that give everyone a chance to participate. One of the other things we do, and it's worth noting, is we've funded the Green Bank and created programs to help businesses and commercial property to make the transition to clean energy. We recognize that for everyone, there's a little bit of lift involved in this, and this is not a free ride. And so the county has stepped up to help not just low-income communities, but other communities and other businesses and assist them in making this transition to a cleaner future. And as I started this, we were talking about the Mesonet network, and people want to know what that is. We highlighted the Mesonet weather stations, and you can see a picture of one of them here. That thing is about 33 feet tall. They've been placed by the University of Maryland in Montgomery County, and they help us gain a better understanding of changing weather patterns in more areas across the county, which enables us to prepare for emergencies. This actually gives us more detailed information at the ground level, where we don't get the same kind of information in our weather reports or normal weather surveillance. So this is increasing our ability to understand everything from temperatures on the street to how saturated the soil is, and that's especially important because when we're dealing with heavy rainstorms, the degree of saturation in the soil affects whether the water goes into the ground and sinks or whether the water hits the ground, can't be absorbed, and winds up running off on our streets and contributing to flooding. So knowing all these things is going to keep us better informed. It'll also give us a better idea of what we need to do long term to help make the county safer when it comes to extreme weather events. We live in a world where our environmental situation is in crisis, and being unprepared without the right information puts lives in danger. We know the Trump administration is not interested in information. In fact, they're trying to dismantle organizations that collect information, because after all, if you know something, you kind of have an obligation to do something about it. But you can, if you don't know anything, then you can say, well, we don't know what we should do, and then you don't have to do anything. In this case, ignorance may be bliss to those who don't want to do anything, but to the rest of us who have to suffer with the consequences of ignorance, their ignorance becomes our suffering. And it is really a shame to have a federal government that actually elevates ignorance, but it's the government we have, and it's what we've got to deal with. We're going to do our part to make sure we do understand what's happening. Over the next year, we'll add a fourth Mesonet station to the network, and we're going to introduce several smaller versions of the Mesonet station into two of our more dense urban areas. So think of the climate action plan as renovating your home. We started with the plan to implement 80 recommendations and have either made significant progress or completed 63 of those actions. That's more than 75% of what we set out to accomplish, but obviously there's a lot more to do. We're not just making minor cosmetic changes, we're rewiring the entire system to make it stronger, cleaner, and fairer. Together, we can build a future where every resident thrives and we all benefit from a starting place that's greener than it was before. And that's our goal, and it continues to be our goal. Finally, I can't ignore Monday's update from the Centers for Disease Control regarding vaccines. Maybe they should just rename it to the Center for Disease Out of Control Policies. This is something I first discussed in December, and rolling back vaccine schedule for children to align with standards set by Denmark seemed imminent. A few weeks passed without any changes, but the Trump administration still got its way. To only recommend 11 vaccines for children represents a significant dismantling of evidence-based public health policy. The agency no longer recommends vaccination against hepatitis A and hepatitis B, influenza, meningitis, RSV, rotavirus, except for high-risk children. We are disregarding results that have been effective in this country for 30 years and aligning with the standards of a country that is nothing like our country. The administration frames this as a move to align with international consensus. This is not an international consensus on vaccines, but we're setting up a dangerous situation that will fall on our emergency rooms and hospitals to fix, with children's lives at risk. So how did we arrive here? Not by following the science or by studies that have been done into the effectiveness of childhood vaccines over many years. We're relying on political appointees, a board of anti-vaxxers, and Secretary Kennedy, who's both an anti-vaxxer and completely unqualified to fill any job with a public health responsibility, whose main goal is to please the president, save money, and remain in positions they're not qualified for, at the president's pleasure, of course. Before we open this up to questions, I'd like to give my staff an opportunity to provide any updates they would like to share, and I'm going to start with our health team.
Great. Thank you, Mr. County Executive, and thank you for highlighting this significant and real change to the childhood immunization schedule. You touched on a lot of really important points, and there's a couple that I want to just reinforce. First, this decision is not based off of science or evidence. It is purely based off of partisan politics and ideology. We know that vaccines are safe, they are effective, and this has been proven time and time again over decades. As the county executive mentioned, they are now recommending coverage of 11 vaccines for 11 diseases instead of 17. Some vaccines were moved from routine recommendations to high risk only, so things like hepatitis A, hepatitis B, meningococcal, or shared decision making, things like COVID, flu, and rotavirus. And this represents a huge shift away from our typical population level prevention that we've taken in the United States for these curable, treatable childhood illnesses. Routine vaccination schedules are designed to work in real life conditions where families face barriers like missed appointments. Anybody that has small kids know how hard it is to get to those doctor's appointments, changing insurance, which we're going to see even more of now with the impacts of HR1, transportation challenges, our fragmented healthcare system. While a simpler schedule might seem appealing in a complex and fragmented healthcare system like ours, it's actually only going to increase the risk among our residents. When we have universal schedules like the one we had, we know that it reduces missed vaccinations from all of those fragmentation pieces that I mentioned earlier. It also helps eliminate confusion for parents, and it helps, most importantly, address the inequitable access that is so important, particularly for our most vulnerable residents. This individualized risk-based approach only works in highly integrated systems. Denmark can do this because they have a universal healthcare system. They have a year of paid maternity leave. They have strong social safety net systems. So it is, all moms are screened for hepatitis B when they're pregnant. The United States healthcare system does not operate that way. So it is inappropriate to assume that a vaccination schedule that would work in Denmark is going to be effective in the United States. And I want to say, just end by saying a couple of things that we are doing and what families in Montgomery County should know. Montgomery County is going to continue to follow the full evidence-based immunization schedule. Dr. Seshamani, our Secretary of Health and Human Services at the state, has said that the state is going to continue supporting the original vaccination schedule. The major entities and organizations are actually informing people that they should follow the vaccine schedule that is being promoted by the American Academy of Pediatrics, not the Centers for Disease Control. It's also important to note that the Vaccines for Children program remains fully operational. Vaccines remain available and free for eligible families, and the Department of Health and Human Services is going to continue to offer those. And pediatricians and clinics are continuing the standard recommendations despite what this new politically motivated childhood immunization guide is. So if you're a parent, what are some things that you can do right now? You still have clear options and protections. As of right now, continue to work with your pediatrician. Vaccines are still covered. Of course, ask questions. So we encourage conversations about vaccines. At the end of the day, this is driven by parents who just have the best interest of their kiddos in mind. Have a conversation with your pediatrician if you have questions. Please do not delay vaccines because of the conflicting messages. The evidence and the data and the safety is clear. And know that for now, vaccines remain covered. So, I just want to reiterate that vaccines remain one of the most effective tools we have to protect our children and also to protect our communities. And here within Montgomery County and within the state of Maryland, we will continue our commitment to evidence-based science. We will continue our commitment to disease prevention. We will continue our commitment to equity and access, and we will continue our commitment to clear communication as this situation evolves. Thank you, and I will turn it over to Dr. Bridgers if he wants to add anything.
Sure. You said it so eloquently, Dr. Ashford. Thank you for your expertise and your passion in this field. Not only you, but Dr. Davis and Sean, who represent our Health and Human Services and the other Health and Human Services leadership team that we have. We will always use data and evidence-based practices to guide our work. So thank you, Mr. County Executive, for always supporting us in this space. And we don't mind questioning the status quo or responding to these federal shenanigans that we know will continue to happen in 2026. Happy New Year to all, and HHS is ready to move forward. I'll turn it over to Dr. Stoddard.
Good afternoon. On a slightly different topic, I want to recognize that this week the Fire Rescue Service did its EMS awards for 2025. There were 22 incidents that were highlighted. And one thing I did, what I thought was one of the most powerful takeaways from these awards was, and Assistant Chief Ben Kaufman did a really good job summarizing this. When we have someone who goes into cardiac arrest in Montgomery County, about 30% of those individuals, they're able to get a pulse returned on them. And about 3 or 4% of those individuals are able to walk out of the hospital within a few days, having experienced no major neurological effects of their cardiac arrest. And inevitably, the most common characteristic of those 3 to 4% of people is a few things. Number one, that someone had called 911 immediately upon recognition of that there was a health impact. Number two, they had initiated high quality and immediate CPR to that individual. That's a friend, a neighbor, a family member initiating CPR, and then use of a public access defibrillator if one was available prior to the arrival of emergency medical services. Our EMS system in Montgomery County is one of the best in the world, certainly the best in the country, but it relies upon rapid intervention of our residents to protect their friends, their families, their loved ones. And, I cannot encourage people enough to get out and make sure that they understand how to do CPR, that they understand if you immediately call 911, we have tremendous 911 call dispatchers and public safety answering point professionals who will talk you through the execution of CPR if you haven't been trained before. And so it is super important that people in our community understand that the best outcomes when someone does go into cardiac arrest are inevitably that someone close to them has begun to do CPR before the arrival of EMS. And so it was great to see there was an individual whose 16-year-old daughter had actually initiated CPR on him. He was thanking the EMS providers, but he was thanking his daughter, and he was thanking his daughter's health room teacher who had taught her how to be able to do CPR. And so it was a tremendously powerful series of awards, and I think it's important that we lift up people in our community who understand that they can be the first response prior to the arrival of emergency medical services. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Doc.
I think a lot of people don't realize how important quick action can be, and that many of us can be prepared to help provide it. So thank you for uplifting that.
Thank you, everyone, for those remarks. Members of the media, so we are going to open it up right now for questions. I see Ms. DeHackleby. It's there. Good afternoon, Bethesda today. How are you?
Hi, good. I had a question for the county executive. I know that the council a couple months ago approved a package of considerations for the upcoming legislative session that you are hoping that the state delegation will prioritize. I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit more to what you're hoping for out of this session, given that we know the state's on rocky fiscal ground.
First hope is do no harm, to minimize the amount of local damage, particularly to minimize any further shifts of things that are state responsibilities to local government. It's always seemed unfair to me for the state to say we can't afford to do that and just assume the local governments can pick these things up and take care of some of these issues. Last year it was another $20-something million in pension shift, not the first time that's happened. So we're hoping we can minimize the number of things they shift to us. If they do choose to shift things to us, then I think it's time the legislature gives local governments the same kind of authority that local governments have in Virginia or in the local government in the District of Columbia, where they have broader tax authority than simply the property tax and the income tax. We have very little flexibility on the income tax, and we have very little flexibility on the property tax because residential and commercial rates are tied together. That is not the case in the District of Columbia. It's not the case in Virginia. And when we think about revenues, those jurisdictions do not rely as much on residential, whether income or property, as Montgomery County does. Montgomery County relies on them more than Virginia or DC does. And if the state wants us to do more, then the state's got to give us the capacity to do more and to be able to do more fairly. So that's one thing I hope. I'm hoping we can get the state to pay attention to our transportation needs, particularly our very specific proposals to authorize the county, not to set any limits or to create the actual legislation, but to authorize the county to put in place the kind of special transportation taxing districts that Virginia has, which has enabled Virginia to build a ton of transportation infrastructure, which in turn has driven their economic development, while Montgomery County remains absolutely unequivocally unable to do the kind of stuff that they do in Virginia. So we're hoping that the state legislature realizes, while everybody's talking about economic development, would they please turn their eyes on the people who are doing more economic development and look at what they do compared to what we're able to do. They might find some valuable lessons there. I'm hopeful that school funding will continue to get the support it needs, that the state's able to participate more, whether it's transportation or environmental or, in social services. They could play a big role in where we go with funding, for example, for early childhood education. And I'm really glad to see Delegate Polakovich-Carr, on that subcommittee, chairing that subcommittee, because this is a subject that's near and dear to me. I know it's near and dear to her and to a number of the other delegates and senators at the state level. So hopefully we can get some help with that. And just generally, I'm hopeful we can come up with, as the state seeks to provide revenues to fill the gap, that whatever we do in the fairest possible way. And I think, I've appreciated the leadership of the state. I've appreciated the inclusion they've done with us, and our delegation's done a really good job of supporting the county. And that I'm looking forward to another productive year with them.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. County Executive. I see Mariam Shahzad from Montgomery Community Media has her hand up. Good afternoon, Mariam.
Good afternoon. Thank you. County Executive, wanted to ask what you think of Congresswoman McClain Delaney calling for Trump's impeachment.
I think it's great. I mean, he should have been tried after his last effort to overthrow the government. He should have been tried for treason. He certainly should have been tried for overthrowing the government, trying to overthrow the government. And it's clear he has no intention of following the common rules of government. So I think her effort to impeach him is well deserved. And I hope she finds some supporters, if not in the next 11 months, hopefully after a new election, when hopefully return sane people to the Congress.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. Judy Perth from the Greater Olney News. Good afternoon, Judy.
Good afternoon. I'd like to go back to a health issue. I am hearing from friends of mine who are journalists in other parts of the state and in other states who are telling me stories about emergency rooms and how crowded they are, and that people are going to the emergency rooms and having to wait 7 and 8 hours to get taken care of because so many people are there due to the flu. Are we seeing anything like that in Montgomery County?
I'd ask my health team to take a crack at that one. This had been raised as an issue some time ago, and Maryland and Montgomery County had very long waits. I don't know what the current status is regarding we do have an uptick in all respiratory virus cases, whether that's causing this problem or exacerbating it. Maybe my health team can provide a better answer for that.
Yeah, happy to answer. So here in Montgomery County, we're about 7 weeks into the seasonal respiratory virus climb, and that aligns with the typical winter timing, but the season is more intense than last year due to the fact that the flu vaccine from this year is not aligning with the strain that has emerged. As folks know, the flu virus changes and mutates every year. So we are seeing influenza emergency department and urgent care visits that are about 3.5 to 4 times higher than this point last season. Even though the weekly growth rate has begun to slow slightly, we've not reached that peak yet, but we are experiencing higher than normal wait times as well. So we have been telling folks that if they need to go to the emergency department, they should pack their patients and definitely pack a mask. We have reached the 10 hospitalizations per 10,000. So many of the hospitals have actually implemented masking for their staff that are patient facing. We are encouraging patients that need to go into hospital settings to wear masks as well to protect themselves and others.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Kate Ryan, WTOP. Good afternoon, Kate.
Good afternoon. Thank you for still being here. I'm sorry to join you late. I have a question on vaccines and the impact on daycare and or schools. Who who decides what schools must require for kids to be enrolled? And how do you see this? How do the health officials there see this impacting both schools and daycares? And are they getting questions on this yet?
Yeah, so the vaccination requirements for schools and daycare are set by the Maryland State Department of Education. And as I shared during the previous update, Secretary of Health Seshimani has indicated we are continuing to follow the old schedule, which is continuing to be endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics. So I do not anticipate any change given the new CDC recommendations. I anticipate that the previous recommendations will still stand. Maryland and Montgomery will continue to follow the science. I have not heard anything particularly since the announcement came out a couple of days ago, specifically from our daycare or pre-K communities, but the state will continue to set those guidelines, and I feel pretty confident that they're going to continue with the recommendations as they were.
Got you. And Dr. Bridgers?
Thanks, Kate. I had to come off mute. I support what our team is saying and what the Secretary of Health is saying. We haven't had any, I haven't received any updates or inquiries from our early education or daycare providers. And so we continue to monitor Dr. Ashford and Dr. Davis and Sean O'Donnell. So there's nothing else to add. I mean, we will continue with our usual practice. And as soon as there's a change, I know that our health team will put out a health officer advisory notice as we've done previously.
Thank you so much. Couple of questions on different topics.
Yes, go ahead, Kate.
If I could, on the labor statistics that came out this morning that showed Maryland losing 10,000 federal jobs in October alone. The governor, of course, brought this up during the Board of Public Works meeting and talked about the need to diversify the economy, as well as just the raw impact of this, that Maryland got hit harder than any other state. County Executive, your thoughts on this?
So I'll just say that, we've been working to diversify the economy before all this started. I mean, I've been working on that and pushing on that since I got elected. That's why, we made efforts to and successfully to get an Institute of Health Computing here so we could, provide some basis for expansion of our life sciences industry. It's why, we've put forward a TIF in the East County to get a long stuck project that has both jobs and housing attached to it, to get that out into the world of possibility, as well as making that available in other cases. So we're well aware of the need to diversify. We are focused on trying to build an economy that has more than one or two cylinders in it. And we think we get better and more balanced performance if we do that. But I'll say, what the federal government does is undermining a lot of that. I mean, a lot of what you'd try to attract here are historically not just government workers, but companies that serve the government. Virginia does very well, for example, with companies that serve the defense industry. A lot of the cuts to the federal government in federal jobs has led to cuts in private sector jobs for companies that serve the federal government. And that presents one of the challenges to diversification, is really if we're losing jobs for which the federal government is either the primary employer or the primary recipient of services, that's something that's going to be another challenge for us. So, major corporations don't often relocate. That's, not something you can hang your hat on. We were very happy that, for example, Samsung Pharmaceuticals decided to buy GSK and not only, buy their building, but maintain all 500 workers and talk about expansion. That is a big deal to have the largest, one of the largest pharmaceutical manufacturers and a major player in the Korean market make a decision to make that scale investment in Montgomery County. We're hopeful that that kind of investment draws more Korean bio companies into Montgomery County. And so I think there are some bright signs on the horizon, but we're going to continue to do what we can do to attract other businesses. I think we've talked before about satellite companies in Montgomery County, the effort to bring some manufacturing to Montgomery County, or we've actually talked with a chip company which is looking to come to Montgomery County. So we're leaving no stone unturned, and we're not passive about assuming that the federal government will be okay anytime soon, and that we should ever go back to a situation where if the federal government's good, then we're good. It's great to have a good federal government. It's better if you've got a lot of other things going on in your county than just the federal government.
Gotcha. And since the rally on that very cold day in Poolsville, trying to get the two property owners on both sides of the river together, have you had any indication that there's any movement there at all?
Yeah, I actually have indication that there's movement. We need some things to happen on the Virginia side, but they're actually working with us. I can say we have some general agreements on some of the broader and most important pieces of this, and I think we're going to get there.
And that's since the rally?
Yeah.
Can you describe a little more fully so the average person understands what are we talking about?
So we're talking about coming up with an ownership and operating structure that alters the parties that are engaged in this. That we've been offered the landing space on the Montgomery County side. We're working with the property owner on the Virginia side. There's been a change in who's leading the negotiations on the Virginia side for the property that I think has been, I think it's been pretty positive. So I think it's led our folks to feel like they're optimistic we can get to yes on this. Some of the big obstacles in terms of how far apart we might have been in terms of terms, I'm not hearing that discussion now. So I think there's a way forward, but I think Virginia also has to reach an agreement on some things of interest to the property owner as well.
Gotcha. And I'm assuming that more details are not going to be coming because they're still talking.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. Members of the media, any additional questions for the county executive or the health team or Dr. Stoddard? No more questions? Oh, I see. Back to you then, Ms. Jacoby.
Hi, yeah. Just wanted to follow up on the situation with the Dickerson incinerator. Do we know, are they back up and running fully at this point? Are they still working with MDE? What's the status of that situation?
I can't answer that right now. I don't know if anybody else on my team can. Nobody's come to me and said everything's good, but I do know they said they had completed the repairs and they were doing testing. That was the last I heard. I will confess I did go away for a week. So they my folks probably actually left me alone to go away for a week. So I'll find out.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? No more questions this afternoon? I guess we're done. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Afternoon.
Bye.